Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is about how change comes when you have the confidence to start. This week's guest has already made multiple appearances on Be the Change Media Network, as she had already been a guest on the Forgotten Generation podcast with Troy when I recorded this episode, and then she was featured on the Sports for All podcast with Eden as well. I was really inspired by this guest when I helped with the editing and production of those other podcast episodes, so I figured that I had to have her on my podcast as well. My guest this week is Leah Nolan, who is a netball coach and an advocate for young people to get more involved in sport and social action. So with that quick introduction, let's get started with this episode featuring Leah Nolan.
So I'm Leah, I'm 23, originally from Stoke-on-Trent. My main work is within sport. I work as a netball coach in a school, but outside of that, I do a lot of youth volunteering work, aiming to get more young people volunteering in sport or just getting involved in youth action generally.
I think that was a great way to get started. And like I said, I'm super happy to have you on my podcast after you were on Troy's, because I think your story was definitely one that I wanted to share as well. So can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to get started with change making and raising awareness and kind of social action work in general? Can you tell me a little bit about that story?
Yeah, I had a bit of a slow start coming into it. Whilst I was at university, I was kind of involved in a program run by England Netball about kind of engaging netball volunteers, like under 25 volunteers, and just because there's a big dropout of players at that age and volunteers that age. So I was involved with that, like a kind of national youth board, coming up with creative ways that we can get people involved. It meant I got to do a lot of cool stuff, like going to the grand final, doing social media takeovers. But then that kind of died off, and then maybe halfway through last year, I got accepted as a I Will ambassador. And it kind of just spiraled from there. I joined league leaders in their coaches' corner, which is obviously sport focused, as well as reach out to all. And yeah, it's just gone crazy ever since, but it keeps me busy. I enjoy it.
That's awesome. I do think that all of those different opportunities, once you get one, usually others come and kind of
Yeah.
start applying to things and you make new connections. So I think that's a great example of that. And I think that's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about your work in the intersection between sport and advocacy? I think it's so interesting that they come together really well, but I don't get that combo all the time where you're doing sport and social action. And I think for you, it comes together so naturally. You kind of explained it in your story, but tell me more about how those two things in your life went together and how they kind of blend for you.
Yeah, of course. Sport like netball specifically has taught me so much leadership, confidence, all of those sort of things. But kind of the thing that causes that crossover is my interest is getting more young people in decision-making roles. So I held a chair of a youth advisory group position, which was then locally trying to get more young volunteers in netball, as well as advocate for LGBT rights in the sport and disability rights within the sport. Because these things are often quite first thing to be forgotten. It's okay, we're a female-based sport, everyone's having fun, but it kind of leaves out all these other circles because you focus on females only. So that was kind of the thing that crosses over. But I've been involved in all sorts ever since, kind of stuff with the general election recently, with I Will. I've spoken at conferences about getting more young people involved in sport and keeping them engaged. It's just, I could talk forever about sport. I don't know if you can tell.
I love that. And I think that's so important, though, that you found an issue that you can just talk forever, because I think
Yeah.
that's something that is so important when you are going on this social action journey or you're trying to make change. You have to be able to talk about it forever. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience as an I Will ambassador? I've had lots of I Will ambassadors on the podcast, but I think everyone's experience has been a little bit different as far as the opportunities that they've had and the things that they've been able to do and the connections they've made as well through I Will. Can you tell me about what that's been like over the last couple of months?
Yeah, of course. So I've had done a few opportunities with them. Like I mentioned, the general election, it was kind of like a news piece. As part of that, I did some media training, which was like never thought I'd ever want or need, but has actually been quite handy, in day-to-day life. I have also, I've forgotten.
We can circle back to it. If you think of
Yeah.
it, just let me know.
Yeah. Okay.
But can you tell me about your work with Reach Out to All as well? I know that that's something that I went to their Birmingham youth event, which was super, super cool, but I've met a couple of people that are also involved with Reach Out to All. Can you tell me about your work with that organization as well?
Yeah, so that's a very new thing within probably the last couple of months. So I'm only really getting started, but the main thing for me has been meeting all these amazing other young people who have these sort of passions. That's how I met Troy, how I met, Eden, who I met through Coach's Corner, and I will. These circles it's like a Venn diagram. There's just crossovers everywhere. And that's been what's really great to me is to know that I'm not the only one kind of fighting in this corner. There's a group of people all over the country, all over the world doing the same sort of thing. So yeah.
That overlap, it does feel so much more like a community. And like you said, you're not doing it alone. There are people that
Yeah.
are also passionate about these issues and also want to support you in that and give you opportunities. I think that's also so important. Can you tell me about some of the challenges that you've faced coming into social action and coming into making change? I think for some people, it's just kind of that push to get started might be a barrier, but what has that been like for you? Can you tell me about some of those challenges?
Yeah, of course. So for me, I am not a very confident person at all. I don't often have the belief in myself. It takes me a while to get going, but I feel like once you get me talking, you can't shut me up. It's like I've been able to stand on a stage in the middle of the country's biggest velodrome and talk about youth sport, which is if you told me that 10 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, whatever. It's been amazing. The thing that I'm struggling with the most at the minute is time. I love to be busy, but right now I'm so busy. I've got a full-time job, I'm doing all my youth stuff, and I'm doing a part-time master's. So that's why I'm still at work right now filming this. So
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do
yeah.
this, definitely. I appreciate it. So what is your advice for young people who might want to get started making change, but might not know where to get started or how to get started with that work? What advice would you want to share with them?
Yeah, so I work in a school. I kind of come across a lot of passionate young people who see the world in a certain way. Is to find the thing that you're passionate about and that you can do. Maybe it's a small thing, maybe it's making a group at school, maybe it's going on a litter pick, but then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more you do it. It's just having that confidence to start and drag a few people along. You meet friends along the way. I speak to people most days that I've like never actually met in person, but we'll chat because we've met through this kind of youth work. So yeah, that's my advice.
I really enjoyed talking with Leah and learning about how she connects her passion for sports with her commitment to volunteering and social impact work. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more from Leah, I would definitely recommend that you go and check out the episodes of the Forgotten Generation podcast and the Sports for All podcast on Be the Change Media Network that feature Leah, and I've linked both of those episodes in the description of this episode. And before you go and listen to those episodes, I want to wrap up this episode by highlighting one takeaway that I had from Leah's advice, and that is that change comes when you have the confidence to start. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Leah on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I included those links in the description. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at Be the Change Media Network. I'm working on expanding Be the Change Media Network, which means bringing you more inspiring stories from amazing guests and new hosts. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And I would also love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.